Hello everyone and welcome to the tiebreaks of the Prague Chess Festival, the Masters Edition. We already said that after Vidit lost his final round game to young Krzysztof Duda, 5 players were tied for first place, but only 2 can go into tiebreaks for the playoffs. So Vidit versus Firouzja. Now it's going to be really interesting because Vidit pretty much destroyed Firouzja in classical time format. He was already lost after 12 moves. It was a really funky line, but Firouzja is number 6 in the world. Well, he was 6th in the World Blitz Championship last year, and he was also 2nd in the World Rapid Championship. So faster time controls will really do favor him. And if you've ever watched the Lichess Bullet Arena or something like that, you know that he, as you know, the lower the time control, the deadlier Firouzja is. So let's see how Vidit plays him in this blitz game. So they will play a 2 blitz game match. It's a 5 minutes plus 3 seconds increment, and if the 2 games end in a draw after the 2 games have been played, if the result is equal, then they go into Armageddon. So let's see what happened. This is blitz game number 1. Vidit has the white pieces and he opens with d4. We have knight to f6 by Firouzja, c4, e6, knight f3, and of course we go into the Queen's Gambit decline. We have d5 and g3 now. We have bishop to b4 with check, bishop to b2 blocking, and bishop to e7 now. Bishop to g2 now, flanking the light square bishop. Castles, and Vidit also castles. We have c6 strengthening the center, and queen to c2, nicely developing the queen. Knight bd7 and b3 now. So very slow development. We have b6 preparing to flank to the light square bishop as well, and the bishop to c3 now, putting the bishop to this diagonal. We have bishop to b7, black does the same. Knight bd2, now maybe preparing e4 in some lines. We have queen to c7, developing the queen, connecting rooks, and now there is one game where bishop to b2 was played, sort of preparing rook c1. At some point you want to capture here and have some pressure along the c file, and there is also one game where e4 was played right away, but here we have rook f to d1. It's a new move by Vidit, so already after move 12 we have a completely new game. So let's see what happens here. Firouzja starts with c5, and it makes sense. If your opponent allows it, you should play it, grab more space in the center, free up your light square bishop. We have rook 8 to c1, and now d captures on c4, opening up this diagonal. And now if you go for b captures on c4, you might be a bit displeased with yourself, leaving your position with an isolated c pawn, for example, after captures. Might be hard to defend this. Let's say captures, rook a c8. It's an isolated c pawn. You also have an isolated a pawn, so probably you will have some problems defending this, especially in a blitz game. So knight captures on c4 instead. We have b5 now, pushing the knight back, but first bishop to a5, displacing the queen. And now, well, queen to c6 is possible. You don't really have to worry about this knight ever moving, but in a blitz game you do not want to put your queen in front of the bishop. So queen back to b8. And now knight c to e5, an excellent square for the knight. We have knight captures, d captures, and knight to d5 now. And bishop back to d2. You could be worried about b4, maybe trapping your bishop on a5. So bishop back to d2, grabbing control of the g5 square, h6, taking away the g5 square from white's pieces. And now Vidit says, okay, the queen and rook aren't really doing all that much on the queen side. This is, well, the e5 pawn is protected. Let's start an attack on the king side with the g4, h4, and g5. So he starts with the g4. We have queen to e8 now. Firouzja now, sorry about that. Sorry about that, there was someone at the door. So queen to e8, Firouzja planning f5. He wants to bring the queen into the game after he pushes f5, and now h4. Still keeping with his plan, we have f5. It's a very bold move, as it does create some weaknesses in the position, but it's a blitz game, so whatever works. So e captures on f6 en passant, knight captures on f6, and now g5. And here g5 definitely a move you want to play, although here it's a bit premature. Problem is, Firouzja has this bishop to e4 move, which will slow down Vidit's attack. So before g5, knight to e5 was a bit better, because it really really just puts knight to a much better square, and there's well, you want to get rid of the light square bishops, and then you push g5. But okay, like I said, it's a blitz game. We have g5, bishop to e4, attacking the queen, so the white's attack slows down a bit, queen to b2, and now knight to g4. And here already Firouzja's pieces are doing good work. The f2 pawn is a bit well, vulnerable now. If the knight moves, then already the rook can jump down to the attack. So bishop to c3, Vidit adds another attacker to the pawn, and now queen to g6, of course defending, and now rook to d7, a very nice rook lift by Vidit, and rook to f7 defending. We have queen to d2, now adding more, well, adding protection to the g5 pawn, and also putting more pressure to the d file. H captures on g5, H captures on g5. And now what happens here? So you could even pause the video and try to find well, we could even say a winning idea for Firouzja while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting bishop captures on f3. It's a move that really comes to mind because, well, you just want to remove the defender of the g5 pawn. It does make sense. The problem is in a blitz game where both of them are very low on time, you have to calculate a lot. So yes, this does seem to be working after captures, captures, and captures. The queen is under attack, the rook is under attack. However, there's rook captures on f7. That's the problem. Not a problem, but it requires additional calculation. Bishop captures on d2, now you capture with check. Queen captures, the queens get traded off. Bishop captures on c1, and now f captures on g4 opens up an attack to the rook. Rook d8, and now you move the bishop, and now it's two bishops against the bishop and the rook, 4 pawns each, and black is of course winning here, but well, you know, when the tension is high, it's hard to calculate everything precisely. So queen to h5 instead. If the knight moves, now you also have access to the h2 square. And here, again, it's not easy to find the move. For Vidit, probably best is to just wait with bishop to b2. You can also now maybe create an attack this way, because this, for example, captures, and queen h2 check doesn't really do anything for black. You don't have a way of actually continuing the attack, and white will just be better here. So here, Vidit tried rook captures on e7. It's a very active idea. Rook captures, and now queen to d6, attacking Firouzja's rook on d7. On e7, and now rook back to f7. We have queen captures on e6, now pinning the rook. The queen is on an excellent square. The bishop is under attack, so bishop to f5, pushing the queen back, and now queen to c6, attacking the rook. And here we have rook to c8, again attacking the queen. You could grab a pawn, but still, in a blitz game, you don't just grab a pawn. So queen to d5, again centralizing the queen, pinning the rook once again. And here rook to e8, piling up on the e2 pawn, but Vidit continues playing very active chess. Queen to c6, attacks the rook and basically forces him to capture on e2, which Firouzja does. We have rook captures on e2, and now rook to d1, not even caring about the f2 pawn. Firouzja says, okay, I'm gonna go for it. We have rook captures on f2, and now we have rook to d8 with check. And now best is rook to f8, but it's hard to figure out why. So after king to h7, feel free to pause the video and try to find the winning idea for Vidit while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations. It's not an easy move to find, especially when you're low on time. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's queen to a8. Interestingly, Vidit played queen to e8. Queen to e8 with the idea of queen to h8 check, but for some reasons, queen to a8 is much stronger, because we're going to show why. Here, queen to a8, you're already threatening rook to h8 with just rook captures here. So after a pretty forced line, rook captures on f3. You want to remove the defender, go after queen to h2. So you force this rook to h8, but then already you're just down too much material. King g6, but again, it requires a lot of calculation. Queen to c6 with check, you're going to block with something, you have to. Rook captures on h5, rook captures on c3 now, g captures on f6, now king captures on h5, and now it's not okay. It's still a queen and bishop against a queen, two rooks, and against two rooks and bishop. Problem is you have queen e8, which basically wins the rook unless you play bishop to g6, but now f captures on g7, threatens promotion, and after rook captures, now finally you have queen to h8 check, which will win the rook, unless you're gonna block, and then you pick up the c3 rook. And now it's a queen and bishop against a rook and bishop, of course completely winning, but it's hard, of course, to spot this in a blitz game. But as it is a beautiful line, I decided to show it. So queen to e8 instead by Vidit. This rook cannot move because of just queen captures. Queen to h8 is coming, followed by rook to d6 check, which will be deadly. So here Firouzja goes for rook captures on f3. So what happens now? We have queen to h8 with check, king to g6, and now, well, now if you continue rook to d6 check, it's not as potent, because after king captures, bishop to d2 check, you can just give up the rook, rook to e3. And after captures, you don't have a way of continuing your attack, you're down a piece, and you will just lose. So after king to g6, we have queen captures on h5, Vidit decides to trade queens, king captures, and now bishop captures on f3. King captures on g5, unpinning, and now rook to d5. Attacking the c5 pawn, going after the bishop, king to f4 by Firouzja, and now bishop captures on g4. We have king captures on g4, and now rook captures on c5. We have bishop to d3, now defending the pawn here, and now bishop to d2. So now Firouzja is up a pawn, but it's bishops of opposite colors. The rooks are still on the board, so there's still play, of course, but it's not going to be easy to convert this extra pawn. King f3, of course, grabbing more space with the king, and now rook to e5. Threatening a rook to e3 check, which will win the bishop. So bishop to e4, not allowing this, and now rook captures on b5. Here it seems like Vidit outplayed Firouzja. He won a pawn due to this little tactic. However, this couldn't be further from the truth. Feel free to pause the video for the final time and find the winning move for Firouzja while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who spotted this wild tactic, congratulations. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook to d7. And it's a setup you might want to remember with the bishop. For example, you have the white king locked down here. The bishop covers h1. That's important. So rook to d7. Now you either win the bishop or the bishop has to move. Of course, Vidit moved the bishop, and now comes rook to d1 with check. King to h2, you don't have access to f2 or g2, so you have to go king h2. And now king to g4 by Firouzja, and it was in this position that Vidit resigned the game, because there is no defense against the rook to h1 mate. So it's really, there are no tricks, there are no checks. You could prolong the game with some rook g5 pointless ideas, but it wouldn't really make sense. So after this, rook captures on b5, it's really a beautiful tactic, and maybe a position you might want to keep in mind if you have something like this. If you have a bishop guarding h1, or a dark square bishop guarding a1, or, well, any other corner for that matter, ideas like this are possible, even at the cost of a pawn. So after this king to g4 move, Vidit resigned, and blitz game number 1 goes to Firouzja. Next game, Vidit will have the black pieces, which will not be pleasant in a must-win situation, but we're going to cover that game as well, so we're going to see what happened there. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Jean-Cherf Barosh, Alexander Lukic, David Cooper, Raymond Young, and Leighton James for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing with one more game from the Prague Chess Festival playoffs, continuing the polymorphy saga, and checking up on your wonderful suggestions. And yes, the subscribers video is almost here. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent start of your week.